G'day audiophiles, and welcome to this bonus edition of the Sirens of Audio. Last year, I released an unofficial audiobook reading of Terrance Dicks' An Unearthly Child. I was unaware at the time that it would prove to become one of our most popular pieces of content. So with that in mind, I decided to do some more. So I was wanting to do audiobook readings of books that were as yet unreleased. So the first one I decided to work on was The Seeds of Death. It was a bit of a slow start. I got some way into recording the book, and then it was announced that The Seeds of Death was going to be released officially, read by David Troughton. So I decided to stop that, but I wanted to release the recording of what I got up to, which is the first 5 chapters of the novel. So as a bonus episode, you can get a chance to hear what that audiobook sounds like, albeit unofficially read by me. If you do like it and you haven't heard the official version, I recommend you locate that via Audible or some other means and support that release. But until then, I hope you can take a little bit of time and sit back and enjoy this reading of another Terrance Dicks classic. Doctor Who, The Seeds of Death. By Terrance Dicks. Chapter 1. Trouble with Tmat. There were voices in the air. Bombay to Tokyo shipment activated. Bombay sending now. Tokyo receiving now. Dispatch completed. New York to Moscow delay. Moonbase clearance awaited. Stockholm to Washington personnel transportation. Stockholm sending now. Washington receiving now. Dispatch completed. The voices were calm, mechanical, inhumanly patient. They were the voices of the planet-wide matter transportation network, Tmat, Tmat for short. Virtually instantaneous transmission of matter, animate or inanimate, from city to city, country to country, men, machinery, livestock, goods and supplies of every kind, from the point of manufacture to the places where they were needed. All other forms of transport were outdated now. The cars, the trains, the boats, even the rocket ships. Toys for a fast dwindling group of eccentric hobbyists. If you wanted to travel, you simply stepped in a booth, dialed, dematerialized, and reappeared at your destination. As a result, the air was clean. The fuel crisis was over. The accidents of travel a thing of the past. Silently, swiftly, efficiently, Tmat moved man and all the products of his skill about the planet. And nothing ever went wrong. Until one day. The vast metal-walled cavern that was Tmat Control Earth was silent except for the steady drone of the computer voice. Control consoles of many shapes and functions were spaced about the enormous room, some attended by silver overall Tmat technicians, others, lights flashing like silent intelligences, humming quietly away by themselves. There was a line of Tmat booths along one wall. Tmat supervisors with clipboards walked silently between the countless rows of instrument panels, continuously checking and rechecking the flow of men and materials about the globe. Their air of bored calm was perhaps due to the fact that 99% of their work, as they well knew, was unnecessary. The ubiquitous, error-free computers ran Tmat, and if the technicians had all stayed home, Tmat would perhaps have functioned just as well, or very nearly so. There were still, however, a few functions left for humans to perform. Occasionally, the constantly conflicting demands upon Tmat channels meant that actual decisions had to be taken, priorities assigned. For technical reasons, the sub-control for this incredibly complex traffic policeman operation was centred on the Tmat base on the Moon. It was on the Moon that such decisions were frequently taken. Meanwhile, here at Tmat Reception Earth, Senior Supervisor Gia Kelly sat at a central command console. Distinguished from the technicians by her black uniform trimmed with silver, Miss Kelly was an icily beautiful young woman with high cheekbones and fair hair drawn back in a neat, tight ponytail. Her face, as usual, was set in an expression of calm severity. Even now, in the 21st century, the equality of women was still more theoretical than practical. It remained as true as ever that, to attain the highest rank, a woman had to be not simply as good as, but measurably better than, her male colleagues. Miss Kelly was as capable as she was ambitious. Her early promotion had been obtained by the stern repression of any softer, more human qualities that might get in the way of her efficiency. The opinion amongst Tmat technicians was that Gia Kelly was a cold-hearted witch, and you'd better not slip up while she was around. Unfortunately, someone was doing exactly that. Miss Kelly sat frowning at the giant illuminated world map that covered the wall in front of her, considering the light lines that flowed continuously across it, frowning at the information conveyed by the calm computer voice. Non-arrival of shipment of synthetic protein. New York to Moscow, moon base clearance awaited. Miss Kelly frowned. Brent, her number 2, a serious-looking brown-haired young man, moved to her side. Yes, Miss Kelly? Why is there a delay at moon control? Brent crossed to a readout screen and studied it. There's some kind of mix-up over that Moscow shipment. It seems to have landed up in Canberra. Fuchsium again, I suppose, said Miss Kelly bitterly. Take Moscow out of phase while they sort things out. Brent punched instructions into a keyboard. Moscow pending, moonbase clear. The computer voice took up its calm, monotonous chant. Toronto, Calcutta, shipment activated. Toronto sending now. After the briefest of pauses, the voice went on, Calcutta receiving now. Dispatch completed. Brent went over to the world map and peered up at it. Moscow ready now, Miss Kelly. Miss Kelly spoke into the microphone in her control console. Report on Canberra-Moscow situation, please. Canberra-Moscow clear. She turned to Brent. Tell them to activate. Brent spoke into his own microphone. Canberra-Moscow, go ahead, please. Seconds later, the computer voice came back. Canberra, sending now. Another brief pause, then. Moscow, receiving now. Dispatch completed. One of the Tmat cubicles lit up and hummed briefly with power. Suddenly, there was a cheerful, balding, middle-aged man in controller's uniform standing inside it. Seconds ago, Controller Osgood had stepped into a Tmat booth on his country estate many hundreds of miles away, and now he was here. It was as simple, as unfussy as that. He stepped out of the booth and strolled over to Miss Kelly, smiling a greeting. Morning, Gia? The smile was not returned. Good morning. It's just as well you've arrived. Oh? What's up? The sooner you take over from Fuchsium on moon control, the better. Osgood groaned theatrically. Oh no, not again. All Tmat consignments are 5 minutes behind schedule, said Miss Kelly severely. Fuchsium just routed a large Moscow consignment through to Canberra. He's a lunatic. You should never have recommended him for an assistant controller's job in the first place. Her tone implied that the problem was largely of Osgood's own making, and that it was up to him to solve it. I know, said Osgood simply. I thought he deserved a break. Sentimental. He'll do something really disastrous one of these days and you'll have to answer for it." Osgood laughed. "So, I'll go and work in a synthetics factory." Miss Kelly looked at him in unbelieving disapproval. She was one of the new breed of Tmat executives, fanatically dedicated to the organisation she served. As far as she was concerned, Tmat actually ran the world, keeping the supplies that were its lifeblood moving. Nothing was, nothing could be, more important. Harry Osgood, however, was an old-timer, a practical nuts and bolts engineer who had worked his way up from the space yards in the old rocket days. There was nothing sacred about Tmats as far as he was concerned. It was just another job. Miss Kelly shrugged. "It's your career." Osgood grinned. "So it is. Got a Tmat cubicle ready for me?" "Yes, number 6. "Right. See you later." Osgood walked over to the cubicle and stepped inside. Miss Kelly turned to Brent. "Prepare Lunar Cubicle 6 for transport to Moon Control." "Ready and waiting." "Activate." She glanced up at Osgood, waiting in the illuminated booth. He had just time to blow her a kiss before he disappeared. "Lucky he got there before the old man arrived," said Brent quietly. Miss Kelly nodded. "Commander Radnor is running late this morning. Better keep a public Tmat cubicle open for him." Brent flicked a switch. "Local cubicle 6 holding open." Miss Kelly glanced at the illuminated wall map. "Report Moonbase situation, please." "Moonbase clear," chanted the computer. "Routine shipments now transferring on automatic control. Local arrival cubicle now activating." Another cubicle lit up and a tall, handsome, grey-haired man in the uniform of a senior controller materialised. He came out of the booth and marched over to Miss Kelly. "Morning, Gia. All functioning well?" "Of course, Commander Radnor." "In your case, Miss Kelly," said Radnor with panderous gallantry, "efficiency and charm go hand in hand." "I try to keep things running smoothly, sir." "And so you do. Nothing ever goes wrong while you're on duty." "I don't allow it," said Miss Kelly simply. Radnor smiled and moved away to the automatic doors that led to his office. Miss Kelly watched him go. Radnor was a bureaucrat, a politician, a public relations man, and, in her private opinion, a pompous old fool. But he was Gia Kelly's boss, and he thought very highly of her, which was all that mattered. The Tmat relay control station huddled inconspicuously on the bleak and sterile surface of the moon. It consisted of a little group of survival domes dominated by the twin aerial towers of the Tmat relay. Inside the main control room, a smaller, more compact version of main control on Earth, Harry Osgood was shouting, "You may have been on duty all night, Fusham, but that's no excuse for these slip-ups." For all his apparent calm in front of Miss Kelly, Harry Osgood wasn't nearly so relaxed about Fusham's erratic performance as he pretended to be. He liked his job with Tmat and he intended to keep it. Despite their differing backgrounds, he and Miss Kelly had reached equal rank in the Tmat organisation, which meant that they were rivals for any future promotion. Fusham's failure would reflect on the man who had sponsored him. The object of Osgood's anger, a thin, beaky-nosed young man, sat huddled miserably over his control console. "They weren't major hold-ups," he muttered sulkily. "Just a few minutes." Kelly was going mad back on Earth control? She would. Fusham looked so dejected that Osgood relented a little. "Look, I'm sorry, Fusham, but it's my neck in the noose as well, you know." "I know," said Fusham miserably. "I'm sorry." Osgood sighed. Young Fusham was a bright kid with a quick, nervous intelligence that went to the making of a good controller. The trouble was, he was still prone to panic under pressure. "All right, Fusham. I'll take over now. You'd better get back to Earth." Fusham nodded wearily and began moving towards the Tmat booth. Suddenly, the silence of the control room was shattered by the shrilling of an alarm. Osgood looked panicked. "Now what?" Fuchsium was staring at a flashing light on his control panel. "The outer door airlocks are open. Anyone outside?" Fuchsium shook his head. The crew of Moon Control hardly ever ventured outside. Now that it was so simple to return to Earth, there was no real reason to, except for the occasional maintenance operation. "Then how come the airlocks are being used?" demanded Osgood. Fuchsium had no answer. Suddenly there came the sound of a high-pitched human scream, abruptly cut off. They both ran towards the doors, but before they could reach them, they opened. Phipps, one of the technicians, staggered into the room. His eyes were wide and staring with horror, and he was gasping for breath as if too shocked to speak. Osgood caught his arm. "Phipps, what is it, man? What's happened?" Phipps slumped against the wall, staring at him. Osgood shook him. "Come on, man, tell us." There was another shriek and the sound of running feet coming towards them. Seconds later, a handful of terrified technicians burst into the room. "Close the doors!" shouted one of them. "We've got to keep them—" He turned to close the doors and then froze in horror at the sight of the giant alien shape filling the doorway. Osgood said quietly, "Nobody move. Don't do anything." One of the technicians' nerve snapped. He turned and sprinted for the door on the far side of the control room. "Harvey, don't!" yelled Osgood, but it was too late. The giant shape in the doorway raised an arm, and a strange, high-pitched note sliced the air of the control room. Harvey's body blurred and twisted and somehow imploded. With a terrifying shriek, he crashed dead to the floor. Osgood and the others slowly backed away as the small group of aliens advanced into the control room. The readout screen in main control back on Earth was flashing a one-word message. Delay. Brent shuddered. Not again. Miss Kelly glanced at the map. The Moscow consignment? Yes. They'll think we're sabotaging their shipments deliberately. Miss Kelly spoke into her mic. Tmat reception Earth to Moon. Controller Kelly calling. Switch your communication links to video. She looked expectantly at the communicator screen, but it was still blank. Osgood's gone too far this time, said Miss Kelly, not without a certain satisfaction. There'll be trouble. Harry Osgood was most certainly in trouble, though not in any way Miss Kelly could have imagined. He had discovered that at least one of the giant alien creatures that had invaded the control room could talk. For all its fearsome appearance, the alien was undoubtedly intelligent, and it had plans of its own, plans that involved the cooperation of Harry Osgood himself. No, said Osgood determinedly, I refuse. The alien's voice was harsh and sibilant, a sort of throaty, hissing whisper that seemed to put extra S's in all the sibilants. You would be wise to cooperate immediately. Otherwise, you will be destroyed. The last word came out in a vicious hiss. There was a tense pause. Osgood said resignedly, Then I suppose I have no alternative. He moved towards a control console. One of the technicians, a stocky, broad-shouldered man called Phipps, called out, Don't do it, sir. Silence, hissed the alien. His back to the alien, Osgood's hands moved swiftly over the controls. The machine hummed with power. Lights flashed. Dials flickered. There is a certain amount of risk, said Osgood over his shoulder. A wisp of smoke was seeping from the connecting panels of the console. You are wasting time, warned the alien. Suddenly, a line of sparks ripped across the control panel, and the wisp of smoke became a stream. There was a small, localized explosion as the panel blew out, and then the instruments went dead. The alien said menacingly, What is happening? I'm afraid there's a fault, said Osgood. The circuit's overloaded. Very unfortunate. The alien stared malevolently at him, and Osgood faced its gaze unafraid. He knew he wasn't going to get away with it, but then he'd never really expected to. Perhaps Osgood wasn't such a dedicated servant of Tmat as Miss Kelly, but still, it paid his wages. He owed it his skill, his hard work, and, if necessary, his life. The alien spoke at last. "You have deliberately sabotaged this apparatus." It raised a hand in signal, and one of its fellow aliens raised its arm, to which seemed to be attached a strangely shaped weapon. Lights flashed, a high-pitched note rang out, and Osgood's body twisted, distorted, and fell to the ground. "I thought this system was supposed to be infallible," said Radnor irritably. "It won't be anything serious," said Miss Kelly, but this time her calmness annoyed him. "I'm so glad you think so," he retorted. Miss Kelly ignored him. "Any obvious damage, Brent?" "No damage reported. All links stable." "That's only local, surely," snapped Radnor. With the same infuriating calm, Miss Kelly said, "It's only one step in the checking process, sir." She spoke into the computer mic. "Report on intercity Tmat breakdown." "Complete power phase blank," came the reply. "State of materialization pulse generator?" "Overloaded in power surge. No damage this end." "Check with Moonbase," ordered Miss Kelly. "Not possible. Primary video link dead." "Cause?" "Under investigation." "You're sure it isn't serious?" said Radnor sarcastically. Miss Kelly straightened up. "Commander Radnor, my staff are running a thorough and immediate check. Until I have their report, I can't possibly answer your questions." "Then they'd better hurry. I want that report. Soon." Abruptly, Radnor left the control room. Miss Kelly gazed thoughtfully after him. Radnor was beginning to panic, she decided. Unless the fault was located and cured very quickly, he would be looking for scapegoats. Tmat was in trouble, and so was she. But even Miss Kelly couldn't begin to guess just how much more trouble was waiting for Tmat. Chapter 2. Enter the Doctor. In a smaller, more oddly shaped control room, not very far away, 3 people were gathered round a many-sided central control console. In its centre, a transparent column was gradually slowing its rise and fall. The 3 around the console were, to say the least, an oddly assorted trio. In the centre, wrestling with the controls, was a smallish man with a mop of untidy black hair and a deeply lined face that looked wise and gentle and funny all at once. He wore baggy check trousers supported by wide, elaborately patterned braces, a wide-collared white shirt, and a scruffy bow tie. This was the Doctor, a wandering Time Lord now tracing an erratic course through time and space with 2 human companions, in a highly advanced but somewhat erratic space-time craft called the TARDIS. The initials stood for Time and Relative Dimensions in Space. On the Doctor's right, a brawny young man stood watching his efforts with an expression of gloomy despair. He wore a dark shirt and battle-dress tunic over the kilt of a Scottish Highlander. His name was James Robert McCrimmon, and he had been snatched from 18th century Scotland to accompany the Doctor in his adventures. As far as Jamie was concerned, the Doctor was a sort of mad magician whose spells might or might not come off. There was only one thing certain about the Doctor. He had a reckless temperament and a great talent for getting into trouble. To the right of the Doctor, a very small, very neat, very precise young woman with a fringe of short dark hair looked on with an air of equal scepticism. She wore a short skirt, a short-sleeved, high-necked blouse with a waistcoat over it, and high boots, all in shining, colourful plasticloth. Zoe's clothes, like Jamie's, were an indication of the time from which she had been taken. Before meeting the Doctor, Zoe Heriot had been a computer operator on a space station. Highly intelligent and with a great deal of advanced scientific training, Zoe had a precise and orderly scientific mind. Sometimes she found the doctor's combination of scientific brilliance and personal eccentricity extremely disconcerting. The problem was compounded by the fact that the TARDIS, like the Doctor, had an uncertain temperament. It had just got them out of one terrifying adventure, and both Zoe and Jamie suspected that it might be about to land them in another. The central column had at last stopped moving, which meant that the TARDIS had landed. This was precisely what was worrying Zoe. "But if we've landed, Doctor, where are we?" The Doctor wrenched at the focusing control on the scanner, which seemed to have got itself stuck. "That's what I'm trying to find out, Zoe." Suddenly an image came into view on the screen. A long, thin, tubular shape narrowing to a point. Zoe studied it. "A rocket?" she suggested. Jamie looked accusingly at the Doctor. "Hey, we're just hanging in space." "We can't be." The Doctor twisted the scanner control. Zoe reached for the console. "Let's try and find a star we know." The Doctor slapped her lightly on the wrist and heaved at the control. The scanner swung away from the rocket and onto the helmeted head of an astronaut who seemed to be peering straight into the screen. "What on earth?" muttered the Doctor. "What's he up to?" demanded Jamie. Zoe said, "He's trying to climb aboard." Just a minute, muttered the Doctor. "This control, it's so stiff." The scanner swung back to the rocket. "Now that is an ion jet rocket of the 21st century, while that helmet—" The Doctor swung the scanner back on to the astronaut. "That helmet is nowhere near as sophisticated. Not later than 1960. "What about those letters on it?" asked Jamie. Zoe read them off. CCCP. "Of course," said the Doctor. He twisted the scanner control again and the astronaut disappeared, replaced by a faded sketch on an antiquated-looking flying machine with spidery foreign writing underneath it. "You see, that explains it." Not to Zoe and Jamie it didn't. "What is it?" asked Zoe exasperatedly. "It's a flying machine designed by a gentleman called Leonardo da Vinci somewhere around the year 1500. Jamie gave the machine an aggrieved look. "Oh, aye? And what's he doing here?" Zoe said sternly, "All right, Doctor, where are we?" "In a museum of some kind, a space museum." The Doctor adjusted the controls and more images appeared on the screen. "There you are, a balloon, a transporter plane." The head of the astronaut appeared again. "CCCP stands for Russia, in Russian. That's Gagarin, the first Earthman in space." Another rocket appeared. Then came a view of the moon as seen from space with lettered across it the title, Tmat Relay. "Come on," said the Doctor happily. "Let's take a look around, shall we?" He loved museums. The TARDIS doors swung open. Jamie and Zoe exchanged glances and then went outside. Surely they couldn't come to much harm in a museum. "Wait for me," called the Doctor indignantly. Snatching a disreputable-looking frock coat from its coat stand and struggling into it, he followed them outside. The TARDIS doors closed behind them and they found themselves, as the Doctor had predicted, in a museum. As in any museum, there were central cases, displays and maps, charts and pictures along the wall. In this museum, each was concerned in some way or other with flight, and in particular with spaceflight. There were balloons and early aeroplanes of every possible design, and a variety of rockets. They wandered around looking at the objects displayed. Zoe noticed that the other rooms leading off looked like workshops and storerooms. She found a button set into the wall and immediately pressed it. A wall screen descended and lit up, showing the view of the moon they had seen before, the words Tmat Relay lettered across it. A deep, reassuring voice came from some unseen speaker. "Tmat is the ultimate form of travel," it announced heartily. "Control centre of the present system is the moon, serving receptions in all major cities on Earth. Tmat provides an instantaneous means of public travel and transports raw materials and vital food supplies to all parts of the Earth. A flow of maps, charts and images accompanied the words. There was a view of the Tmat relay station on the moon, shots of happy citizens using Tmat booths to whisk them from one capital to the next, flowcharts showing how Tmat moved people and materials around the globe. Jamie nudged Zoe. "Tmat? Sounds like a magic carpet." "Shh, Jamie," reproved the doctor. "I'm trying to listen." The voice boomed on. Tmat has superseded all conventional means of travel, using the principle of dematerialization at the point of departure and rematerialization at the arrival point in special cubicles. Departure and arrival are almost instantaneous. "Faster than light," said Zoe wonderingly. The voice boomed on, giving an exhaustive rundown on the workings and benefits of the Tmat system. Although the system is still in its relatively early stages, it is completely automated and foolproof against power failure. The screen went dark and retracted. Jamie looked at Zoe. "We've got our own system, thank you, only it isn't foolproof." "Now, Jamie," began the doctor reproachfully, and broke off, staring past his companions. A man had come silently into the museum. He was covering them with a blaster. In the Tmat control room on the moon base, Fusham was staring fearfully up at the alien leader. Behind him, the two technicians, Phipps and Locke, glared up at the invader in uneasy defiance. "You saw what happened to your superior," hissed the alien. "You would do well to cooperate." Fusham summed up all his courage. "Killing him didn't do you any good, did it?" The alien said confidently, "But you will do as I ask." "I can't. There's nothing I can do." "You will find a way. You do not want to die." Fusham glanced swiftly at the two others. All very well for them to look defiant. Their lives weren't under threat. "I'm not that good a technician," he pleaded. "It needs an expert." The alien gave a hiss of impatience. "You are the second in command here. Therefore you have certain abilities. You must know what needs to be done." "In theory, yes," admitted Fusham. "Then you will do it." Phipps attempted to come to Fusham's aid. "He's right, you know. He'd only make it worse. It needs expert technicians." The alien's head swung round to look at them for a moment, then turned back to Fusham. "These two, what is their status here?" "Maintenance technicians, second class." Locke, the second technician, said, "There's only one person who can put things to rights, Miss Kelly, and she's on Earth." Phipps nodded. "That's right. Without her it just can't be done." The alien regarded them impassively for a moment. "Who is this specialist?" "Miss Kelly's the technical coordinator," said Fusham. "But there's no way to get her, now Tmat isn't working." The alien looked round the control room. "You have a video link?" "Yes, but Osgood wrecked that too." "There is no means to communicate with Earth?" "No." Phipps' voice was almost triumphant. "You've cut us off." "Then you are all useless," said the alien flatly. "You will all be destroyed." He gestured to the guard at the door, who instantly raised its weapon. "Wait!" shouted Fusham desperately. "There's the emergency Tmat link. It only works between here and Earth." "You will activate it now." "It's almost certainly damaged as well," protested Fusham. "These technicians will assist you to repair it." "He won't help you," said Phipps defiantly, "and neither will we." "Then he will die. You will all die." The alien leader moved to the doorway and paused.
"You will start work at once. There will be a guard at the door. When I return from my ship, you will have this Tmat link ready for operation."
He swung round and marched from the control room, and the doors closed behind him. Without speaking, Fuchsium moved to the console that controlled the Tmat emergency link and began checking it over. Phipps and Locke closed in on him, speaking in low voices, aware of the giant alien still on guard at the door.
"Don't be a fool, Fuchsium," urged Phipps. "If you repair the link, these creatures will travel to Earth."
"But what about us? They'll kill us."
"Do you think repairing that will make any difference?" asked Locke. "As soon as he's got what he wants, we'll be useless to him."
"If we cooperate, there's still a chance."
"Osgood didn't take it," said Phipps.
"And you saw what happened to him. Do you think I want to die? Like that?" He looked at the huddled bodies and shuddered. "I want to live!" "Have you found anything at all?" demanded Miss Kelly. "Any trace of a reason?" Brent shook his head. "Every link has been double-checked. This end is absolutely undamaged." "Then the trouble must be at Moonbase." Brent shrugged. "We have no way of checking their installation from this end, and they just don't answer our calls." "Where's Commander Radnor?" "Not back from the Intercity Council meeting yet." "He'll expect a full report." Brent slapped a bulging folder down onto the console. "Well, there it is. We've checked everything, even the computer." The doors opened and Radnor appeared. He stood looking grimly at them for a moment, and then marched over. "You've located the cause of this breakdown?" "Things at this end are absolutely clear," said Brent defensively. "That is not what I asked you." "We cannot trace the fault, Commander," said Miss Kelly flatly. "Miss Kelly, I have a number of senior government officials hounding me. They expect more of an informative answer, and so do I." "I'm afraid there isn't one, sir. The trouble is with Moon Relay." "Then go and deal with it." "And just how do I get there, sir, with Tmat not working?" "We can't even talk to them, sir," said Brent. "There must be some way to reach them," insisted Radnor. "There isn't," said Miss Kelly flatly, "unless you suggest we go there by rocket." Brent smiled at the almost insolent absurdity of the suggestion. All rocket travel had come to an end many years ago. Once Tmat became established, rockets were obsolete, useless. But Radnor wasn't laughing. A rocket? It might be our only chance. "The only place you'll find a rocket is in a museum, sir," said Brent. "Exactly," Miss Kelly said scornfully. "Even if there was a rocket that could still be made operational, there's no one left who could control such a project." Radnor said triumphantly, "That's where you're wrong, Miss Kelly. There is just one man alone who could help us now." As it happened, that one man was covering the Doctor and his two companions with an ugly, old-fashioned but still very dangerous-looking hand blaster. "For the last time, who are you, and what are you doing in my private workshops?" he demanded. "There's really no need for all these histrionics," said the Doctor reproachfully. "We're quite harmless, you know." "How did you get in here?" "Oh, the usual way. We just materialized." "The Tmat cubicle always gives an automatic warning signal, and it didn't. Why have you come here?" "To see your wonderful museum." Suddenly the man noticed the square blue shape in the corner. "What on earth? That's a 20th century police box, isn't it?" "Well, in a way, it is," said the Doctor evasively. "What's a thing like that doing in my rocket museum?" "You might say it's a form of spaceship," began Zoe. "Shh, Zoe," said the Doctor hurriedly. "I think we really do owe this gentleman an apology. You see, we really are interested in your museum, Mr. Eldred," said the old man ungraciously. "Professor Eldred." And indeed, He looked exactly like a professor, thought Zoe. An old man still vigorous, with wings of white hair framing a high-domed, bald head.
"Look,"
the old man continued,
"this museum is closed to the general public. You've obviously made a mistake. Perhaps you'd be good enough to go now."
"Why? Are you in charge of this place?" asked Jamie truculently.
"I own it," said Eldred simply. "That is why I have the right to ask you to leave."
"There's no need to threaten us, you know," said the doctor indignantly.
"Trespassers are not welcome. Now will you please leave?"
Raising the blaster, the angry old man marched threateningly towards them. Chapter 3. Radnor's Offer. It was Zoe who saved the day. Ignoring the blaster, she stepped in front of the professor. "But we're not trespassers. We're really interested." "Interested?" Eldred paused. Somehow Zoe sensed that he desperately wanted to believe her.
"Interested in Professor Eldred and his antiquated machines? Come for a good laugh, I suppose, like the rest of them."
The doctor looked shocked. "People laugh at all this? But it's a magnificent exhibition." The old man looked suspiciously at him.
"We've had enough souvenir hunters too."
"Now look here, we're not thieves, you know," began Jamie indignantly. "We don't want to take anything," said the doctor. "We are genuinely interested in space travel." He moved to the model rocket they'd seen on the scanner, slim and elegant on its stand. "Why, who wouldn't be interested in a thing like this? It's superb." Eldred moved to join him, looking sadly at the model.
"Yes," he said softly. "Magnificent. It was to have been the vehicle to take men beyond the moon. But of course Tmat put an end to all that."
"You mean the model's been abandoned? But its speed and stability concept alone. Surely it's a tremendous advantage in rocket design."
"Exactly," spluttered the old man. "Exactly. Here, let me show it to you."
Tossing the blaster aside, he helped the doctor to lift the rocket and stand from its pedestal and rest it upon a low table. He pointed to the sudden thickening at the base of the rocket.
"This was the secret, the real breakthrough. A compact generator of enormous power."
The doctor tapped the side of the rocket.
"This must be the secondary electrode accelerator." "That's right. It beat the problem of the neutral cesium ions and, incidentally, magnified the G-thrust to fantastic proportions."
"That was awkward. What did you do about that?"
"I'll show you," said Eldred eagerly. "Come with me."
He led the doctor over to a filing cabinet and produced and unrolled a sheaf of engineering blueprints. The doctor studied them absorbedly.
"My word, yes, I see. This is superb."
"Look at them, Zoe," whispered Jamie, indicating the doctor and Eldred, "like a couple of kids." "You can see he's almost in love with that rocket," she said. To her embarrassment, Eldred overheard her.
"It's not surprising if I am, young lady. I designed it. I've been in rocketry all my life. My father engineered the first lunar passenger module, and I travelled on the last flight back to Earth, just before it all finished."
"Before all what finished?" asked Zoe.
"Why, space travel, of course."
"But if the rocket was so good, why did you stop at the moon?"
"Because of Tmat. Tmat, the ultimate in travel. With as much sense of discovery and adventure as a synthetic carbohydrates factory."
The doctor looked puzzled. "But surely rockets would still be useful as an auxiliary means of travel. And how else is man to get beyond the moon?"
"Nobody cares about space travel anymore," said Eldred sadly. "Life was made too easy by Tmat."
The doctor nodded understandingly.
"So your project lost government backing, I suppose?" "The project was abandoned," said Eldred sadly. A sudden gleam came into his eye. "Except by me."
Fuchsium was working single-handed on the Tmat link, so far with very little success. He turned frantically to Locke and Phipps. "You've got to help me. If we don't repair it, we'll all be killed." "Maybe we could repair it and Tmat back to Earth," suggested Locke. Fusham looked quickly at the giant alien guard. "With that thing guarding the door?" "Maybe there is something we can do," said Locke slowly. "I knew you'd see reason," said Fusham eagerly. Locke crossed to the video link console and began to examine it. Locke looked up at Phipps. "The video link isn't so badly damaged as the Tmat." "We were told to repair the Tmat, not the video link." Ignoring Fusham, Phipps crossed to the console. "Let's have a look. Even if we can't escape ourselves, we might be able to get a warning message through on video." "The guard will see what you're doing," whispered Fusham. "They'll kill you. They'll kill us all." Without looking up, Locke said, "You play your game, Fusham, and we'll play ours." The alien guard looked on impassively as the two men went on with their work. "No more money, no more research facilities," said Professor Eldred sadly. "A life's work abandoned just like that, all thanks to Tmat." The doctor said, "I can understand your sense of bitterness, Professor. It's very short-sighted of the government to put all their eggs into one basket." Suddenly, Eldred seemed to recollect his earlier suspicions. "Look, you still haven't told me who you are or what you're doing here." Before the doctor could reply, they were interrupted by the sound of an electronic bleeping. Eldred looked even more suspicious. "That's the main door alarm. What's going on?" Suddenly, the room's main doors slid open, revealing a tall, grey-haired man and an attractive but severe-looking young woman. Professor Eldred glared at them like one whose worst suspicions have just been confirmed. "Commander Radnor! Come and see how your spies are getting on." Radnor gave him a puzzled look and turned to the doctor with the accomplished courtesy of the practiced politician. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met. My name is Radnor, and this is Miss Kelly." "How do you do?" said the doctor with equal politeness. "This is Zoe, and this is Jamie, and I'm the doctor." Eldred watched them with an expression of scornful disbelief. "Come on now, Radnor. Don't pretend you don't know them." "I can assure you I've never met them before. They're complete strangers." Eldred snorted unbelievingly. Jamie looked at the doctor. "What are they on about?" "I've no idea, Jamie, but I think we'd better keep out of the way." The doctor took Zoe's arm. "Just look at this model, you two. It's quite fascinating." They hovered in the background, pretending to examine the rocket model, while the dispute between Eldred and Radnor raged on. "I see," Eldred was saying scornfully. "I catch 3 strangers prying around my museum, and then, by the merest chance, you turn up on their heels." "My dear Daniel, I merely came for the pleasure of a chat with a very old friend." "Why? It's a pleasure you've managed to do without for a number of years." Radnor beamed. "Well, old times. Friendship doesn't die, eh?" "Our friendship ended the day you walked out of my laboratory to join the government administration on Tmat." Radnor shrugged. "Different men, different careers." "Yes, indeed," said Eldred bitterly. "Only you happen to know which career was going to be financed with generous government funds." Now Radnor was becoming angry. "You could have come over with me. We asked you to join us." "And work as Miss Kelly's assistant, perhaps?" Miss Kelly said seriously, "I respect your work very much, Professor Eldred. We'd have welcomed you on Tmat." "I happen to prefer rockets, obsolete as they are." Radnor gave him a meaningful look. "Oh, not so obsolete as all that, perhaps, eh, Daniel?" The old man glared suspiciously at him. "And what does that mean?" "We don't miss much, you know." "So you have been spying on me?" No, we stopped all that some time ago." "I should think so too. What's wrong with running a private museum?" "Nothing. But then, you're doing a little more than that, aren't you, Daniel?" "What if I am?" said Eldred defensively. It's a free country, isn't it? A man's entitled to a hobby." "Rather more than a hobby," said Radnor smoothly. "After all, preparing a rocket for an unauthorized journey into space—" "All right, so you know," said Eldred defiantly. "What do you intend to do about it?" Radnor produced another of his practical politician's smiles. "My dear chap, help you, of course." It was one response that Eldred wasn't prepared for. "What did you say?" "You can make your little trip, Daniel, and with full government backing, just as long as it's to the moon." "There's a minor fault developed at Tmat Control on the moon base," said Miss Kelly smoothly. "We have to put it right, quickly." "I thought Tmat was infallible," sneered Eldred. "It will be, eventually. However, at the present moment, we have no way of reaching the moon." Eldred laughed out loud. "Except by my out-of-date rocket! Oh, that's rich. So you need me after all." "I thought you'd be taken with the idea, Daniel," said Radnor ingratiatingly. "And a generous grant from government funds won't come amiss, eh? How soon can you be ready to blast off? Can you give us an approximate ETA? It's rather urgent." "I could, but I won't," said Eldred calmly. "But why, Daniel? Why? I assure you there are no strings." "I don't have to give you my reasons, Radnor. I'm just telling you I refuse." Watched by the terrified Fusham, Phipps and Locke were completing the repairs to the video link. Phipps straightened up. "That should do it." Locke nodded grimly. "I'll switch on the power." "You fools!" moaned Fusham. "When they find out, we'll all be killed." Cautiously, Locke started transmission. "Moonbase to Tmat reception, Earth. Moonbase to Tmat reception, Earth. Emergency, emergency, emergency." "You can't refuse, man," shouted Radnor. "There's more at stake here than an out-of-date rocket program." The voice of the omnipresent computer interrupted them. "Emergency message from Moonbase. Switching through now." A communications screen on the museum wall lit up and an anguished face appeared, filling the screen. "Commander Radnor, Miss Kelly, we are in desperate trouble. Osgood is dead and—" "Locke!" shouted Radnor frantically. "Locke!" The screen was blank and silent. A clamp-like hand swept Locke's improvised video link to the floor. Locke turned and looked up at the alien leader. The alien's sibilant voice called, "God!" The giant figure at the door lumbered forward. Its massive body was covered in scaly green hide, ridged and plated like that of a crocodile. The head was huge, helmet-like, ridged at the crown, with large insectoid eyes and a lipless lower jaw. The alien leader shared the same terrifying form, though its build was slimmer, the movement somehow less clumsy. The jaw, too, was differently made, less of a piece with the helmet-like head. The leader's voice hissed, "Kill him!" The guard raised a massive, clamp-like hand, which had built onto its top a kind of tubular nozzle. Light flared from the weapon. Locke's body twisted and fell. Dispassionately, the two aliens watched his dying. The lives of inferior species were of no interest, no value as far as they were concerned, and to the giant green invaders, all other species were inferior. They were Martians. Their armoured bodies evolved to withstand the incredible cold of a dying planet. They were ice warriors. Chapter 4. Countdown. Fusham looked on with horror as Locke's body gave a final twitch and lay still. Purely by luck, Phipps had been clear of the console at the moment when Locke was discovered and killed. The guard, by moving forward, had left him a clear path to the door. Phipps knew that he would only get one chance, and he seized it, taking off like a rocket and sprinting for the open door.
"Stop him!"
hissed the leader, but it was already too late. Phipps was through the door and away into the maze of corridors.
"Hunt the one who escaped,"
hissed the alien leader. The Ice Warrior Guard lumbered away in pursuit. The leader turned on the terrified Fuchsium.
"You allowed them to send a message to Earth," he accused.
"They tricked me. I tried to stop them."
"No matter. The one who escaped will be found and killed."
"What about me?" The Ice Warrior leader, whose name was Sla, considered for a moment. As far as he was concerned, the fact that Fuchsium had stood by while others tried to outwit their captors was an offence punishable by death. But, on the other hand, Sla was under orders from the High Command, and an important part of those orders was that he should get Tmat into operation. Unfortunately, these humans were showing a tiresome tendency to get themselves killed rather than cooperate with him, and Fuchsium was now the sole surviving human captive. Sla advanced menacingly on the terrified human.
"Have you repaired the Tmat link?" he asked.
"Not yet. It isn't easy."
"But it is possible."
"Yes, but you must give me time."
"Very well. Continue to work. You know what will happen if you fail."
Fuchsium glanced at Locke's huddled body and hurriedly looked away.
"Exactly," hissed Sla. "If you fail, you too will die."
Commander Radnor was using all his powers of persuasion on Professor Eldred, but with very little success. "Daniel," he pleaded, "don't you see that this is beyond our petty quarrel about Tmats and rockets? Those men at Moonbase are in serious trouble. We've got to help them." "Then you'll have to find some other way." Miss Kelly added her persuasions to Radnor's. "With Tmat dead, there is no other way. Your rocket is our only hope of getting to the moon." The doctor couldn't stay silent any longer. "Professor, please listen to them." "Oh, I'm listening," said Eldred sadly. "Forget your wounded pride," urged the doctor. "In a way, this is a triumph for you and your rocket." "It is?" "Of course it is," said Radnor. "The government recognises the fact." "Then the government is going to be disappointed." Radnor looked helplessly at the others. "I just don't understand." For a moment, Eldred stayed obstinately silent. Then he heaved a deep sigh. "I'd better be frank with you. It's true, I played with the idea of making another space flight. I even worked on the rocket. But it was just a dream, an illusion for a disappointed old man." Miss Kelly said, "You mean there's nothing? There is no rocket?" "Oh, the rocket's there all right. It's even partially prepared. But as for an actual lift-off—" Eldred shook his head. Radnor said eagerly, "We can still do it, Daniel. I know we can." "It takes more than enthusiasm to get a rocket off the ground." "Just ask for what you want. Men, money, equipment." "We need the one thing you haven't got," insisted Eldred. "Time." "We'll set up a crash program," promised Miss Kelly. "Draft all the best available technicians." "It's nowhere near ready, young woman," shouted Eldred. "Most of the equipment is still unchecked." "Then we'll check it. The computer can be programmed for that." "It would still be impossibly dangerous." Radnor put a hand on his shoulder. "Daniel, with you in control, with you as the driving force, you created that rocket, got it off the drawing board. You can do it again." "Those days are long past. My heart wouldn't take the strain of the G-force." "That doesn't mean your knowledge and experience are useless," pointed out Miss Kelly. "We still need your guidance." For a moment, Eldred looked tempted. Then he shook his head. "I can never go to the moon, and neither can my rocket." As the argument raged on, Jamie turned to Zoe. "Can we not help them? We could use the TARDIS." "For a trip to the moon?" said Zoe doubtfully. "We'd probably overshoot by a few million years." She looked at the doctor, who nodded his agreement. In normal circumstances he might have risked it, but recently he'd been doing some work on the navigational system. Much of it was in pieces, and it would take a very long time to reassemble, with no guarantee that they'd work any better at the end of it. "A few million miles or a few million years," agreed the doctor ruefully. "I'm afraid the TARDIS isn't suitable for short-range travel, Jamie, not in its present condition." "Still, I think we ought to help if we can," said Zoe. "Yes," said the doctor. He stepped forward and said modestly, "I think I could get your rocket to the moon." Eldred stared at him. "You?" "I have considerable experience of space travel, and so have my friends." "But the rocket just isn't ready." "I think you're overestimating the dangers, Professor," said the doctor briskly. "How much work does your rocket actually need?" "It needs fueling to begin with, and a complete computerized checkout of all the instrumentation." "I can arrange all that," said Radnor eagerly. "Don't let him do this," pleaded Eldred. "The risk is too great." Radnor looked at the doctor for a moment, then turned back to Eldred. "Believe me, if there was another way, I wouldn't even consider such a risk." Miss Kelly, too, was looking at the doctor. "There's always an outside chance that the fault will clear itself, or we might be able to effect a repair from this end." Radnor hesitated, and the computer voice broke in again. "Urgent message for Commander Radnor. Tmat receptions, New York, Moscow, Tokyo, express great concern over continued hold-up. Medical shipments and food supplies awaiting urgent shipment to Asiatic countries. Calcutta says position desperate. Instructions awaited." Radnor looked round the little group. "There's your answer." The doctor said gently, "I know. I'll be happy to help if I can." "You don't know what you're doing," shouted Eldred. "Don't be a fool. It's suicide." "If the fault in Tmat continues much longer," said Radnor, "there's going to be worldwide chaos. The lives of millions are at stake." "Infallible Tmat putting the world at risk?" accused Eldred. "And now you want to risk this man's life to get you out of trouble." "No," said Radnor quietly. "Not me. All the millions of people all over the world who will die if this fault isn't corrected. I'm sorry, Daniel. I have no alternative. Miss Kelly, get all available technical personnel working to prepare the rocket." "Yes, Commander." Miss Kelly hurried away to the communications console, and Radnor said gently, "We'd be grateful for your help, Daniel." Eldred snorted. "If that rocket's going to reach the moon safely, you'll need more than my help. You'll need a miracle." A huge scaly green form lumbered along the featureless metal corridors of the moon base. At the sound of approaching movement, it paused, alerted, raising the built-in sonic gun upon its wrist. Another giant form appeared around the corridor, and the Ice Warrior relaxed, recognizing another of its own kind.
"Have you discovered any trace of the escaped human?"
hissed the newcomer. The first Ice Warrior said,
"He has not been found. Continue the search. He must be found and destroyed. Sla has commanded it."
The two Ice Warriors resumed their patrol. The first continued on its way until it paused outside a door marked Solar Energy Storeroom. It hesitated for a moment and then went inside, glancing round suspiciously. There was little to see. The walls were lined with metal shelves holding boxes of spare parts. Larger pieces of machinery, spare consoles, filing cabinets, an out-of-service energy converter were ranged neatly about the room. Slowly, the Ice Warrior moved into the centre of the room. Its helmet-like head swung from side to side, then it turned away. What it had failed to see was the missing technician Phipps, flattened motionless into the shallow space between a massive instrument console and the wall. As the Ice Warrior left the room, Phipps emerged cautiously from his cramped hiding place. He hurried to the door and closed it behind the departed alien. Then, like the Ice Warrior before him, Phipps stood looking around the storeroom. He was looking for a weapon, or failing that, for something that could be made into a weapon. His eye fell on a metal chest marked Solar Amplifier. Opening the lid, Phipps began lifting the complex piece of machinery out of the box. The early stages of the countdown had begun. All the resources of a panic-stricken government had been called in to convert Eldred's museum and workshop into the control room for the hastily mounted rocket launch. A team of technicians was installing control consoles, telemeter screens, communications monitors, and a complex assortment of other essential equipment. Eldred himself was supervising the work, assisted by Zoe and the doctor. Jamie, completely baffled, stood by, trying to look as if he understood what was going on. Commander Radnor was busy at a communications console. Assisted by Miss Kelly, he was using his authority to ensure that the supply of men, fuels and scientific apparatus continued to arrive with the minimum of delay. As she punched yet another requisition into the computer, Miss Kelly said, "Commander Radnor, are you sure it's wise letting these people crew the rocket?" She nodded towards the doctor and Zoe, who were discussing the intricacies of the ion drive with Professor Eldred. Wise? Of course it isn't wise. But what's the alternative? We stopped training astronauts years ago. But who are they? Some of Eldred's crazy friends, I suppose. That odd-looking little man certainly knows his space travel. Miss Kelly looked doubtfully at the doctor. How can you be sure? You weren't at the briefing session. The doctor, and that girl for that matter, know even more about spaceflight than Eldred. What about the boy? Radnor frowned. I'm not too sure about him. He doesn't seem to have any scientific background at all. Raising his voice, Radnor called, "Doctor!" The doctor ambled over to him, Jamie and Zoe close behind him. Radnor cleared his throat. Doctor, are all three of you planning to crew the rocket?" He glanced meaningfully at Jamie. Jamie caught the look and said truculently, "Aye, we are. I can be useful too, you know." The doctor said worriedly, "Jamie, I hadn't really thought—" "You're no leaving me behind, and that's that." Eldred came over to them. "There can be no excess weight on this trip, young man." "How many does this rocket thing of yours hold?" "Well, it was designed for a 3-man crew," admitted Eldred. "Well then, I'm going." Miss Kelly looked up from her communications monitor in alarm. "Commander Radnor, our stocks of chemical fuel are inadequate for the moon journey and return." "What about other sources of supply?" "New York and Moscow, but delivery is impossible because of the Tmat malfunction." There was a moment of dismayed silence. Then the doctor said cheerfully, "Surely, it's only a question of getting there. We shall come back by Tmat." "Possibly," said Radnor. "That rather depends what's wrong with it." Eldred said gruffly, "There is another source of supply. There's a rocket fuel dump on the moon, an automatic refueling system connected to the landing bay." "Surely the equipment hasn't been used for years," protested Radnor. "Neither has the radio homing beacon, and if that doesn't work, they'll never make a landing at all." Jamie whispered to Zoe, "Maybe we'll no need to worry about coming back." "All the equipment is completely automated and solar-powered," Eldred was saying. "No reason why it shouldn't work, Doctor." "I'm sure it will,"
Now, are you sure you can remember all your briefing?
Oh, I think so, and even if I can't, Zoe has total recall. Eldred produced a bulging plastic folder.
I've written it all down for you just in case. There's a map of the moon base here as well. You remember how to activate the homing beam?
Don't worry, my dear fellow. Your rocket will be in good hands.
Eldred went on fussing. Now remember, you only have food and water for 3 days.
Miss Kelly said, Commander Radnor, I think I should go on the trip.
Don't be ridiculous, Miss Kelly. You're too valuable here.
But how can Tmat be repaired if I don't go?
There's Osgood, began Radnor. He broke off.
Miss Kelly nodded grimly. Exactly. Osgood's dead.
There are the other technicians.
Who may be dead as well by now. I still think I should go.
No, said Radnor fiercely. You're the only person here who really understands Tmat. I can't risk you on this mission.
Miss Kelly waved towards the doctor and his 2 companions. Yet you're perfectly willing to let these 3 risk their lives? Radnor was silent. He could scarcely point out that the lives of 3 unknown strangers represented a very small stake as far as he was concerned. The doctor saved him from his embarrassment. Don't worry, Miss Kelly. We'll be perfectly all right. How can you say that? She said despairingly. You don't even know what the trouble is up there. The trouble, of course, was an ice warrior called Slar who was looming menacingly over the terrified Fusham.
Is the emergency link to Earth ready? He asked.
Fusham was working frantically. I've nearly finished.
Do not make any mistakes.
I warn you, I'm not an expert.
You will make it work, hissed Slar.
Yes, all right. Fusham spoke without looking up. Anyway, I don't see what good this emergency link is going to do you. You're only a handful. And even if you had a huge army of warriors, you couldn't send them all to conquer Earth. Slar was silent for a moment. Then he hissed.
We do not need an army. Earth will be ours for the taking. Very soon.
Chapter 5. Blast Off. Phipps stood gazing thoughtfully round the storeroom. He noticed a number of solar reflectors stacked in a corner and went over and selected one. He found a toolkit and some connecting cable and began linking the reflector to the solar amplifier. In the base of the solar amplifier was a coil of heavy-duty cable with a massive plug at the end. Uncoiling the cable, Phipps began looking round the storeroom for a power source. He found one at last beneath a hatch cover, itself half hidden behind a pile of metal crates. Opening the hatch cover, he revealed a massive socket with a power lever beside it. Above socket and lever, bright red lettering spelt out the words, Danger! Solar Power Line. In Eldred's workshop, now an improvised rocket launch control, members of the launch crew were gathered at their control consoles. Eldred and Kelly were running through the final checks. The Doctor, Jamie and Zoe were already on board the rocket. Ignition reserve power, said Eldred. Zoe's clear voice came back over the receiver. Fully charted. Then Miss Kelly. Internal atmosphere settings? The Doctor's voice came back. All normal. The list of checks continued until at last Miss Kelly sat back with a sigh of relief. Liftoff activation check complete, Commander Radnor. All systems alpha green. At her side, Radnor was listening intently. Well done. Everything completed in record time and not a thing wrong. So far, said Eldred gloomily. Radnor said, Doctor, I'd like a final check on procedure when you land, please. The Doctor's cheerful voice crackled back through the speakers. Yes, I know. We're to re-establish video contact with Earth as soon as possible. That's right. Once we can see what's wrong, You can repair it under Miss Kelly's supervision."
"Right you are,"
said the doctor, thinking privately that he'd probably just get on with fixing Tmat himself, without supervision from Miss Kelly or anyone else. Politely he added,
"We're ready when you are."
Wincing a little at the doctor's informality, Miss Kelly said, "Link program to telemeter guidance, 3 minutes. Countdown will begin at T-minus 60 seconds. Radnor leaned forward. "This is it. Prepare for countdown." Miss Kelly said, "All functions now on computer control. Clear launching site." In the cramped rocket cabin, the doctor, Jamie and Zoe were strapped into their 3 chairs, following the launch procedure through their headphones. The cabin was tiny, and the 3 chairs and their 3 bodies pretty well filled it up. The cabin walls were lined with dials and instruments so that the whole cabin served as a cockpit. The doctor sat in the central pilot seat, Jamie on his left, Zoe on his right. The voices of the launch crew formed a continuous background buzz over the cabin speakers. 3 minutes can seem a very long time, whispered Zoe. The doctor said, "Now, remember your takeoff briefing, won't you, Jamie?" "I know all about this G-force stuff," growled Jamie. "You don't know it till you've experienced it," said Zoe severely. All right. To be honest, Jamie was feeling more than a little out of his depth. It had been all well and good insisting on his right to be one of the rocket crew. However, when Eldred led them to the launch pad behind his workshop, and Jamie looked up at the rocket towering above him, he began wondering what he was letting himself into. The journey to the top of the rocket on the lift gantry had been pretty terrifying in itself. Now Jamie sat huddled in his seat, reflecting that he was soon going to be a lot further off the ground before very much longer. Miss Kelly's voice broke into his thoughts. T-minus 60 seconds. 1 minute to 0, warned the doctor. Hold tight, everybody. In the improvised control room, everyone's eyes were fixed on the shape of the rocket, endlessly repeated on the banks of monitor screens. Miss Kelly's calm voice took up the final stages of the countdown. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. With a roar that shook the control room, rocket motors flamed and the silver column lifted off the pad and sped skywards. Miss Kelly slumped back in her seat, suddenly exhausted from all the long hours of work. "We have liftoff." A ragged cheer went up from the exhausted launch crew. Just for a moment, all of them were touched by the romance of rocketry. Eldred stood looking at a monitor, watching the rocket streaking steadily upwards. On his face was the incredulous delight of a man who sees his lifelong dream come true. Then a shadow of sadness crossed his face. For him, the dream had become a reality too late. From now on, he could only watch. Even Radnor was strangely moved by the occasion. "I never thought to see that again. A rocket, rising in flight." "It's beautiful, said Eldred. "Let's see how they are." He flicked a switch, but the monitor in front of him stayed blank. He turned to Miss Kelly in panic. "The link is dead!" "Something must have gone wrong on liftoff," muttered Radnor. "Try the backup channel, Miss Kelly." Miss Kelly adjusted controls on her console, but the monitor screen stayed dark. "It's no good. There's nothing." Radnor looked at her in horror. "Then we're completely out of touch with the rocket." "What about audio link?" asked Eldred. Miss Kelly switched to audio. "Earth control to rocket. Do you read me? Over." The only reply was a fierce crackling of static. Jamie opened his eyes, feeling like a mosquito swatted into unconsciousness by a giant fist. None of the doctor's warnings had really prepared him for the sudden hammer blow of G-force. As Zoe had said, you had to experience it to know it. Now he felt squashed, stiff and bruised all at once, and to make matters worse, some woman was nagging in his ear. "Earth control to rocket. How do you read me? Please switch to audio communication. Do you read me?" Jamie tried to sit up, and found to his horror that he was floating up, tethered to his seat only by a safety harness. Without it, he would obviously go bobbing about the cabin like a balloon. He looked round for his companions and saw that the doctor and Zoe were conscious, both busy at the controls. "Don't release your safety straps till I switch over to artificial gravity control, Jamie, or you'll float away," warned Zoe. "Earth control to rocket," said Miss Kelly's voice again. "Oh, wait a minute, can't you?" said Zoe crossly. "We've only just recovered from takeoff." Then came Eldred's voice. "Is everything all right? We seem to have lost the video link." The doctor was checking the instrument panel in front of him. "Probably just a circuit fault somewhere. He broke off, coughing and choking as smoke poured from the panel. "The circuit's burnt out. I'll switch to secondary circuits." "Och, no," said Jamie disgustedly. "This is worse than the TARDIS." In rocket control, the doctor's voice faded away into a blur of static. Eldred called, "Doctor! Do you read me, Doctor?" There was no reply, just a continuous crackle of static. "It sounds as if the entire communication circuitry has blown," said Miss Kelly. Eldred nodded. "Let's hope that nothing worse has happened." "Keep trying, Miss Kelly," said Radnor. Miss Kelly nodded. "Earth control to rocket. Do you read me?" On the moon, Fuchsia made a final connection and slumped back wearily. "It's done. The emergency link is working." The shadow of Slar fell across him.
"Good.
"What are you going to do?"
Do not ask questions. Activate the link, but on receive only."
"Receive? You mean you don't want to send anybody?"
"Activate the cubicle, now."
Brent was reporting to Radnor on the video link from Tmat control. "We've double-checked everything, sir. The fault is definitely at moon control." "Thank you, Brent." The monitor went dark and Radnor turned to Miss Kelly. "Do you think you'll ever be able to direct the repairs over the video link?" "Provided the fault's not too major, yes."
"And provided the rocket actually reaches moon control,"
muttered Eldred. Radnor was about to make an angry reply when the monitor lit up again. Brent's face reappeared. "Miss Kelly, the emergency link with Moonbase has been activated." "Has anyone come through?" "No, the link is set to receive only." Radnor looked puzzled. "Surely the rocket can't have reached the moon yet." Miss Kelly stood up. "Moon control must have managed some kind of partial repair. Brent, have a full emergency repair kit waiting. I'll join you as soon as possible." "Standing by, miss." Miss Kelly flicked off the video link. "Goodbye, Commander." "Miss Kelly, where do you think you're going?" "To Tmat reception, and then to moon control. If the link's on receive only, it's the only thing I can do." "But you don't know what conditions are like up there." "I know what conditions are like down here, and I know it's my job to put things right." "You cannot assume that responsibility without my authorization." "You stopped me once, Commander," said Miss Kelly calmly. "Please don't try it again, or I shall be forced to go over your head." With a nod of farewell, she walked quickly from the room. Eldred chuckled.
"She's after your job, Radnor."
"She's a fool," said Radnor stiffly. "But I should hate to lose her." Phipps checked over his improvised lash-up for the last time. Would it take the power load? Or would the whole thing blow out, making it useless as a weapon and betraying his position at the same time? He rammed home the solar power plug. All he had to do now was throw the switch. His personal defense setup completed, Phipps began to work on the second stage of his plan, Construction of a communications device that would enable him to send a warning message to Earth. The Tmat booth in Moon Control lit up. Miss Kelly emerged, 2 technicians behind her. The control room was empty except for the lonely figure of Fusham slumped down in one of the console chairs. He leaped to his feet as they appeared. "Thank heavens you've come!" Miss Kelly glanced round. "What happened?" "It was Osgood. It must have been some kind of space madness. He just went berserk. It was terrifying." "Osgood?" said Miss Kelly incredulously. She remembered Osgood's cheerfully disrespectful farewell. She'd always had a weakness for Harry Osgood, despite, or perhaps because of the fact that he was one of the few men who didn't seem in the least afraid of her. "I should have thought he'd be the last man to crack up." "That's what we all thought," said Fusham simply. "Where are the others?" "When Osgood fused the controls, Locke tried to stop him. Osgood killed him." "What about Phipps?" "He was injured in the struggle. I've got him in the sick bay under sedation." "And you?" "I'm all right," said Fusham defensively. "Nothing happened to me." "You look frightened." "Wouldn't you be, if you'd seen Locke and Osgood die?" "How did Osgood die?" Fusham hesitated, as if confused by her rapid string of questions. "His body's out there. He just went outside." "Without a pressure suit?" Fusham nodded. "I see." Miss Kelly turned to her waiting technicians. "Open up all the control sections and computer links and check them over. We must assess the damage." She noticed that Fusham was busy at the control console. "What are you doing, Fusham?" "I thought I'd better switch off the emergency link for the moment. I had to improvise a repair, and it could burn out at any moment." Miss Kelly nodded, satisfied. "Good idea. And it'll stop Radnor sending a security squad to drag me back." She turned to supervise her technicians who were already at work dismantling the control console. Sla and one of his ice warriors watched them from the corridor through the narrow gap in the door which hung slightly ajar.
"The other human is still free," hissed Sla. "Find him. He must not be allowed to interfere with our plans."
The ice warrior moved away. His communication setup now completed, Phipps hurried over to the power socket and plugged it in. He had to unplug the improvised weapon to do it, but that couldn't be helped. He went back to his improvised audio setup, adjusted dials and picked up the hand mic. "Hello, Earth Control. This is Moonbase. Emergency. Emergency. Do you read me?" The machine hummed and crackled, but no answering voice came back. Desperately, Phipps began checking over the device. He tried again. "Hello, Earth Control. This is an emergency. Do you read me?" On the rocket ship, now rapidly approaching the moon, Zoe was engaged in much the same task with an equal lack of success. She stood back, shaking her head. "It's no use. No contact at all. Every circuit's dead." "Yes, all very unfortunate," said the doctor. He began fiddling with the controls. "Oh, leave it alone," said Jamie. "We might blow up the whole rocket next time." "No use worrying about the radio now anyway," said Zoe practically. "We're nearly at the end of the journey." "All the same, I would have preferred to have kept in touch with Earth, Zoe." "We don't need them, Doctor. All we have to do is activate the moon homing beam." "Aye, and how do we do that?" asked Jamie. "We're not in contact with anyone on the moon." There was nothing Zoe loved more than passing on a bit of scientific instruction, especially to Jamie. "It's quite simple, Jamie. We send out a coded radio signal which triggers the homing beam into action. Then we automatically lock onto it until we reach the point in orbit where we fire retro rockets to land." Jamie still wasn't convinced. "If everything on the moon base is cut off, how's this beam thing going to activate?" "It works from a different power source," explained the doctor. "Solar power, in fact. It shouldn't be affected by whatever's happened to the Tmat system." "Aye, well, I just hope it works, that's all. We'll have a lot of trouble docking at Moonbase if it doesn't, said Zoe grimly. It could be quite a crash. Well, let's test it, shall we? Suggested the doctor. We're close enough now. He went to a separate console and threw a switch. Immediately, a rhythmic signal sounded in the cabin, 3 separate notes repeated over and over. Seconds later, it was answered by a single clear note from the speakers. That's it, said Zoe delightedly. As long as that note holds steady, we're home and dry. No trouble at all. Jamie gave her a sceptical look. Phipps was still trying to raise Earth on his improvised communication link. He was unaware of the fact that on a display panel above his head, a signal light was flashing over the words, Radio Link Operative. Hello, Earth Control, called Phipps. This is an emergency. Can you hear me? Earth didn't hear him, but unfortunately an ice warrior patrolling nearby did. It swung round, lumbering towards the sound. Hello, Earth Control. Emergency, repeated Phipps. Then he heard the hum of the opening doors. Looking up, he could see the giant green form on the other side. Before the doors were fully open, Phipps had dived across the room, unplugged the communicator, and was hiding behind the crates, the plug to the solar amplifier ready in his hand. The ice warrior strode into the centre of the storeroom and stood, looking menacingly about it. Suddenly, it became aware that it was standing in the centre of a circle of solar reflectors. Phipps thrust home the plug. Immediately, all the reflectors flared into searing life. Caught in the converging heat beams, the ice warrior jerked and twisted, its giant body blazing with energy. Then it simply vanished, vaporized by the colossal heat. Phipps emerged from hiding, more than a little astonished by his own success. He went back to his communications unit and resumed the task of trying to raise Earth. Hello, Earth! This is Moon Control! Emergency! Absorbed in his task, he didn't notice that the radio link operative light had blinked out. In the rocket control cabin, everything was silent. The homing beam's cut out, said Zoe in alarm. The doctor turned to the trouble. I'll see if I can reactivate it with our signal. Once again, the 3-note signal filled the cabin, but this time there was no single note reply. What's gone wrong, Doctor? Asked Jamie. I thought it was all automatic and foolproof. Something must have affected the solar energy system, said the doctor thoughtfully. Some kind of power drain. And you said we're in trouble if it didn't work. I'm afraid so, Jamie. Without the guiding beam, it's impossible to land safely. You mean we'll crash? Zoe said. Either that, or drift endlessly through space with no hope of landing anywhere. Ever. This has been a bonus episode of the Sirens of Audio. And once again, can I reiterate that if you enjoyed this unofficial reading, that you locate the official version, which you'll get all the chapters to, performed by David Troughton. It's well worth the effort. We'll catch you next time for another episode of the podcast.